Can you hear me okay? Quick thumbs up. Yeah, cool. Okay, right. So I've called this I've called it nice to see everyone, by the way. I've called this the Job Conundrum. So Job's a big book. I'm sure we've all read bits of or heard talks or have our own little opinions about Job. But for years and years, I don't know if I've ever quite fully understood or felt settled with anyone's sort of conclusions from it. There's always obviously really good things in it, but some people say, oh, Job was at fault all the way through it. Some people say he was good, and I don't suppose it really matters one way or the other. And there's lots of little lessons to draw from it. But I just so a few years ago, I decided to go and do a bit of a study and spent quite a long time really doing it. And this was I came to one, so I'm going to go through the whole story, but one little conclusion that brings it really up to something that we can learn from it as well. And I've called it the Job Conundrum because it is a little bit of a conundrum. It means a difficult. Sorry.
Thank you, Martin.
So something that it's just a difficult question or something to try and get your head around. So anyway, so we're going to go into the Job Conundrum. So this is a scripture in Ezekiel, and it says, and it's this, the context of this particular verse is saying that it's saying, if God's saying, if Israel sinned and I brought some, he actually mentions this about 3 times, something like a verse like this. He says, if I brought punishment onto the land of Israel because they sinned, he said, even though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in the land, as I live, saith the Lord, they shall deliver neither son nor daughter, they shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness. And you look at Noah and Daniel, they were guys who, if you read their stories, they basically didn't have a fault. I'm sure they did, they were human beings, but their stories were about people that were faithful and righteous, and that's what sort of delivered them and got them through their situations, and they were tough situations. But Job, Ezekiel says Job's the same. He puts them in the same bracket as them. So I think that would suggest that God honors Job and he recognizes his righteousness in it. So so that's a good sort of perhaps a clue of who he was. So this is Job. In the book of Job, it says he was the greatest of all the men of the East. It describes him as being honorable, of great possessions. He had great wealth. He had a large family, and he was famous. People knew him from miles around, and you can see all those sort of little clues in verses. Like I say, it's 42 chapters. We're not going to go through the whole book, but that's Job. And God said of Job, he says, there was none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man. And that's what God said of Job. He was perfect and he was upright. There was no one else like him. So he was pretty special, impressive guy. And what happened is, as the story goes, is that Satan approached God and he says to him, that guy Job, well, actually God says to him, have you noticed Job? And Satan says to him, well, he's only good and righteous because you've given him loads of stuff, because you look after him, because he's nothing ever goes wrong in his life. And that's that was Satan's accusation. And so and he says to God, he says, does Job fear God for naught? Is there God's love, his respect for God? He says it's because he's got everything, because everything goes well for him. Why wouldn't he fear God? Why wouldn't he respect God? Why wouldn't he follow God? And that was the accusation. And so it goes on that God basically says to Satan, okay, I'll show you that there's more to Job than you think. You can cause problems for him. In fact, some of them, I like this little idea that the devil, Satan, can't do anything. He's got no power on earth other than God allowing him to have it. And in today's world, he says to him, he hasn't he can't touch God's people, which is a really, really good thing, because God doesn't allow that him to touch God's people. But on this occasion, he allowed this to happen. And a couple of things, actually, Satan couldn't even do it. God had to do them, because it was beyond Satan's power to do it. So this is Satan's accusation. Thou was blessed the works of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. So that's what he's saying. That's why he blesses you. And we see a little insight into to what Job had. He had lots of camels, lots of donkeys, lots of cattle, lots of sheep. So lots of that was sort of like the wealth of the day. It was like having a garage full of Ferraris and Porsches and Rolls Royces and that sort of thing. And he had a nice house with a lovely family. A big family, and he loved his family. He wanted to look after them. He prayed for them, and he was a good man. And this is something else. It says about we hear this later on, that one of the guys who we're going to meet in a minute says, "Behold, thou was instructed." This is talking to Job. It says, "Thou was instructed many, thou was strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was fallen. Thou hast strengthened the feeble knees." So Job was known for being someone that not only had he lots of wealth, he didn't let it go to his head. He had a great family, but it wasn't that he was only focused on his family. People would come to him with their problems, and he would uphold them. He would strengthen them. He would give good advice. He would look after them. He'd strengthen them. He probably gave of his wealth to help other people, and that's the sort of guy he was. And elsewhere in chapter 29 specifically, it says this is what it says of Job, the sort of man he was before all these bad things happened to him. It says he was people came to speak to him. They wanted to hear what he had to say. When Job spoke, even princes refrained from talking. So great men stopped to hear what Job had to say. It says he's someone that looked after the poor. He helped the blind and the lame. And even if he didn't know what to do, what to help, it says, "The cause I knew not, I searched out." So he even went out looking for things to help people with. So he was a really, really good guy before all these bad things happened to him. He was righteous. That's what God said of him. He was perfect, and none like him in all the land. So he was like the perfect man with all this stuff. But God allowed Satan to test him as a type of to make these bad things happen to him, to see what happened. And slowly, one by one, I'm not going to go through the whole story, but it's a sad story. Slowly, he lost everything, all of his wealth. And then, if you think this isn't just a story, this is a real person that actually lived, how hard this would be to deal with, because it's easy when it's a story of someone that lived 3,000, 4,000, however long ago, many years it was. It's like when you hear news of bad things happening the other side of the world, and it's just like it's a statistic. But you imagine the fact that he's lost all his wealth, people could handle that, but then he loses his family as well. His family all die, all his children. It's a quite a hard thing. He's gone from a happy Job to a sad Job. But he was the perfect man, because God said, even after all that, says, "In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly." Incredible, really, isn't it? That he didn't sin, he didn't turn against God, and he didn't blame God for that. That's quite an incredible thing. It says, "Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down to the ground and worshipped." He was still humbled before God, despite all of those things that went on. Quite a remarkable thing. And God said, "Look, you've." He still holds his integrity. He's still true to me, even though you did all of that. And God had put a stipulation on this, by the way, to start with. In this first, there were two sets of calamity that came upon Job. In this first one, God had put a little bit of some barriers or some limits to it. He said, "You can't harm him himself, just his things, this stuff, his belongings, his wealth." But then God said, and Job basically says, Satan says to God, that's because I couldn't harm him. So God says, all right, you can harm him as well. And what happened? Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself in the slides. So the Job conundrum was what happened to Job fair? He hadn't done anything wrong. He hadn't deserved all of that. It was this thing that was going on that he probably didn't know anything about, of Satan talking to God. And so was it fair? Question. That's the Job conundrum. But Satan, as I said, he has another go at him. And it says, so Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sword boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And so from a happy man to a sad man, he goes to someone that's very forlorn and in a really bad way, covered in boils, sitting there all on his own. But he wasn't all on his own for long. So in comes the wife, as she often does. And his wife said to him, dost thou still retain thine integrity, curse God and die? I asked Emma to go and sit on the seat at the other side before I did this, just in case she decided to throw something at me. But that was Job's wife. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaks. What shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And Job basically says, look, why, if God's given us good, why do we feel we're worthy to just have good? Other people have bad things happen to them. Isn't it fair that we have good and evil? So he's really starting to try and work this out in his head. But again, he to all intents and purposes, he came through the second trial. The first trial was losing all his goods and his wealth. The second trial was when it affected him personally. We all know when we're ill. It's hard to be circumspect in our thoughts when things are happening to us personally. It's harder to see clearly and to really put things into perspective. It affects our mind, and that's, I suppose, what was happening to Job here a little bit. But it says again, in all this, did not Job sin with his lips? He refused to curse God in all of this stuff. So I said he wasn't on his own for long. Three of his very, very good friends of old came along to see him, and actually says that they didn't know what to say to him to start with. It's one of them verses it's easy to miss. But his three friends come along, and it says, so they sat down with him upon the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So they literally just sat with him for 7 days, staring at him and watching him be miserable, covered in boils. They probably kept their distance because in fear of whether or not the boils were contagious. But yeah, quite a sight. So Job's friends, after the 7 days, they started to give him advice and to give their opinion. And to sum it up, there's 29 chapters of it, but to sum it up, what they were basically saying is God always makes the good to prosper, and he ensures that calamity always befalls the wicked. That was their judgment. That's what they saw. And it's interesting, if you talk to people in the world generally, that's their thought, is if God's real and you're a Christian, why do you go through problems? Because God would only ever let good things happen to good things and bad things to bad people, because people miss the point. And I think that's part of the story here. So there's 29 chapters of discussion. We're not going to go in through all 29 chapters, or we'd be here till next Tuesday, but I'm going to just pick out a couple of little bits, because there is characteristics of these three guys, these three friends. But during those 29 chapters, it's worth reading, because it is quite there's quite a lot in there that's just really quite it is, as it says there, it's all those things. It's poetic, it's beautiful, some stuff in there that's actually quite wise, quite enlightened, but there's also some quite ugly and unkind things. And I think if you look in the world today, you read the wisdom of the world today, you listen to all the smart, intelligent people, that are supposed to know everything, and the celebrities that that control the world's media and all these things. You'll get a mixture of all of that on the screen there, and what's written in those 29 chapters in the middle of the book of Job. There's some very witty, clever, funny people who purport to be wise, and but it's actually quite dark what they're saying, and it's untrue. And there's some people that are supposed to be intelligent and have it all together, and it's ugly and tragic what they talk about. And I think that is a representation of the modern media and the celebrity world that we live in, is all those things. And they mix it all together like Job's friends did. So we're just going to look at a few little points in there as well. So this was a guy called Eliphaz, and this is one of the things he said. He said, "Remember, I pray thee that whoever perished I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off, even as I've seen that they that plough iniquity and sow wickedness shall reap the same." So he's saying to him, this doesn't happen. You must have done something wrong, because it doesn't. God's not like that. You must have done something wrong. He says, and then he accuses him, and this isn't true. There's no evidence in the book. The evidence in the book, as I showed you before, is exactly the opposite to what his accusation is here. He says to him that you've stripped the naked of their clothing. You didn't give water to the weak. You didn't give bread to the hungry. You sent people away empty. That's not the testimony of Job elsewhere in the book. So he says, you must have he starts to put doubt into his mind, really, and starts to accuse him of things that are not true. And he says, you must have sinned pretty bad. His next friend comes along, Bildad, and he says to him, how long will thou speak these things? Because Job's justifying himself all the way through this as well. He's answering his friends. And he says, how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a strong wind? Does God pervert judgment, or does the Almighty pervert justice? And he's basically saying the same thing, is you're trying to justify yourself, you're trying to hide something. And he says, how can God be justified? How can man be justified with God, or how can he be clean that is born of a woman? And he's basically saying we're all sinful in that sense. So this is actually true what he's saying here. But he's trying to get Job to sort of, he's saying you must have hidden something. Really, you'll keep suffering until you confess. Then Zophar, the last of his three friends, he says, know therefore that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserves. And he's basically saying to him, you're probably even worse. You deserve this, and you probably deserve even worse. You're a really, really bad person. And there's lots of other stuff in amongst all this. I'm just picking out a couple of bits. But he says, the increase of his house shall depart, his goods shall flow away in the day of his wrath. This is the portion of a wicked man from God, and the inheritance appointed unto him by God. And if you look at, if you were to put all their comments, you separate them out in the book, what you'll see is there is set sort of patterns in what they say. They all came from a slightly different opinion, and it's a religious view of the world, a religious view of what is, but it's not the evidence of what you read in the book of Ecclesiastes is much more honest opinion of what the way the world is. That it's not always to the swift, the race isn't always to the swift. The mighty don't always win. The wise aren't always the ones that get rewards. It's just time and chance. And he's basically saying you deserve to suffer, and it will get worse. So far so good. Happy story. So that's Job's friends. And Job responds to them. This is one of my favorite verses, the way he responds to them, as he sums up who they are. And he says to him, your miserable comforters are you all. So they sat there with 7 days and looked at him, then came up with all their great speeches, and he just says, you're miserable comforters, all of you. And that's what he called them. So Job's complaint was this. During the course of those 29 chapters, he says, I wish I'd never been born. That would have been better than this. Interestingly, Solomon says that in Ecclesiastes as well. He asks God, he says, what did I do wrong? And you have to pick these out in amongst the verses, but he says, what did I do wrong? and he says, leave me to die in peace. That would be better than this. He asks, why is God doing this to me? And it's just a verse. He says, if I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I am full of confusion. Therefore, see thou mine affliction. And I just ask us, all of us, have we ever prayed a prayer like that, where you just say, look, if I'm bad, then perhaps I do deserve it. But if I'm right, I'm just confused by it all. And he's just praying to God and says, do you see my affliction? What is why is God doing this to me? What's happening? And I think we've all been in situations where we could pray a prayer like that. Don't worry, it does get happy in the end, because there's a really good lesson to learn from this, and we are getting to that. Because this is the truth of things that go on in the world. The wicked do prevail. You see it. You only have to look around and you see that sometimes the wicked do prevail. It's not always happy ever after in the stories that, or the films, or the things that you see on the news. The wicked do prevail. It's a fact. Job's complaint, because he saw that, and that's while his friends were saying to him, no, you must be evil, Job said, no, it's not true. The wicked do sometimes prevail. He questioned himself. He said, maybe I am a sinner. Maybe I do deserve this. But then he comes back all the way through. He says, but I know that God is just. He refused to blame God in it. And this fabulous verse here, which is a real pointer to Jesus, he says, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. He knew there was a bigger picture, ultimately. But he still said, oh, that God would answer me. And again, I think we've all been there. And we could probably all say those four things quite clearly. So then comes in this great young lad called Elahielu. I think that's how you pronounce it, Elihu. He comes in after the three friends have sort of been silenced. He comes in with some wise counsel, this guy. And he said, and he starts to explain it, and he says, and this is getting towards my point, is that he said against Job was his, that means God's wrath or anger kindled, because he justified himself rather than God. But when you look through what Job said, it was all about him. All the way through, it was all about him. Woe is me. And we'll just open on that point, because I'll go back to the Job Conundrum. Was what happened to Job fair? In the sense of, did he deserve it? Then no, he didn't deserve all them calamities. But was it fair in that he was alive? He had a great life. He didn't deserve that either. None of us have earned anything. We all have life. It's free. It's a free gift. Every single person that's ever been born has life, has something which is remarkable. What an incredible thing to have life, to have that opportunity of life. So in the sense of, was it fair? Well, when you compare life to bad things happening in life, is it fair? Did we earn anything? Do we deserve to have it taken away? Do we deserve to have anything that we have? That's an interesting conundrum as a question. And what is fair when God gives it all anyway? But that's not the point I want to make. This is from Job 33. This is the gospel in Job, really. It says, God is great, or this is what Elihu says, God is greater than man. Why dost thou strive against him? For he gives not an account of any of his matters. For God speaks once, yea, twice, yet man perceives it not. And this is the story of mankind, really, is God is greater than man. God put man upon the earth, and he gave him instruction from day one. He said, this is right and this is wrong. And man has forever strived against God. And God does not have to answer to man. He doesn't. He's the creator. Mankind is the human race is the created. God doesn't have to answer to man. And he speaks to mankind. You could say he spoke once, spoke twice. Maybe that is the Old Testament and the New Testament. But it says when Jesus came onto the earth, it says the light came into the darkness, and the darkness didn't perceive it. He didn't understand who it was. When God speaks, mankind doesn't hear, because God doesn't owe mankind anything. But God still loves man enough to give him the answers, but people don't hear it. And that's the gospel that of today, really, as well. And then he says, when he opened the ears of men and seals their instruction, then he opened the ears of men and seals their instruction, that he may withdraw man from his purpose and hide pride from man. God gives mankind the way out. He gives him an instruction, and he gives him a way to free himself for his own nature, his own pride, through receiving the Holy Spirit, if mankind would only hear him. And it says, then he is gracious unto him, says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. And again, another direct pointer to Jesus Christ, who came to pay the ransom for mankind, for our inability to hear God and to follow his instruction, that we might have a way out. And so the gospel's there in that book as well. And Elihu tells Job that God is righteous. He tells him that self-righteousness is a sin. And that us being Job being a good man, that doesn't actually help God. It doesn't aid God. Job being a good man, God doesn't need people to be good. It doesn't do him any benefit. It's for our own benefit to be good, and it's not so we can be great and say, "Look at me." And also, whatever mankind does on the earth, his inability to listen is sin. It's not going to stop God's purpose. God's going to carry out his plan anyway. Solomon in Ecclesiastes, his conclusion of the matter, because he goes through some of these same questions really that Job went through, is fear God and keep his commandment. That was the whole conclusion of the matter. And then towards the end of Job, it says, touching the Almighty, we cannot find him out. He is excellent in power and in judgment, and in plenty of justice he will not afflict. God is righteous and all powerful. And then he goes through, this is just a little aside, but it's worth reading because it's just amazing. But it's an aside from the message I want to sort of try and get across today. But towards the end there, he just goes through and he says to Job, he's just basically trying to get across to Job how the bigger picture, and that it's not all about him. He says, where were you when I created the earth, the clouds, the universe, the animals, the snowdrops, the waves, all these things? He says, well, you've got no idea the scale of it all. It's not about you. So the Job Conundrum. And this is the point. Job was totally innocent. He didn't, it wasn't a result of his sin. When bad things happen, it's not a result of sin. It's not a result of what we do, wrong, because it's just life. Life happens sometimes. He was totally innocent of sin. But this is the point. He failed the third trial. And what I mean by that is that, I didn't mean to give away the punchline then. What I mean by that is he had bad things happen to him. He overcame. He overcame. He didn't let it turn him away from God. We've had bad things happen to us in life. We have things go wrong, but it's not turned us from God. He passed the first trial. He passed the second trial of when things happened to him personally. He had boils and all these things happened to him personally. He passed that trial. He didn't curse God and die. He didn't blame God for it. He was innocent in those things. He was perfect in those things. But he did fail the third trial. And this is the big lesson I want us to take through this, is that he wasted far too much effort and energy and emotional struggle trying to work it all out. And that was what was all about him. And that's the big thing I got from going through this story is things happen. We can pray. We see miracles. We see God change situations. But every time I've tried to work it all out and say, why this and why that and why has that happened and why has that gone wrong and why didn't that go this way, all it's done is caused me more grief. All it's done is caused the problem to be worse. Whereas if you just trust God and you say, I'm going to fear God and keep his commandments. That's the conclusion of the matter. Then you can actually rejoice regardless of circumstance. And that's the thing I sort of got from this. It's all right just carrying on. And that's good. It's good to carry on in your trial, but don't fall into the trap of questioning it all and trying to work it all out. That's where it makes it really hard. So that was the third trial that Job failed. But that's not as a type of losing his salvation. It just made his life more difficult than it had to be. He made it all about him. The answer is to seek God. Don't make it all about woe is me and what I need and that sort of thing. Seek God. Walk in the spirit and you'll not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's what it says. Don't forget trying to solve the lust of the flesh. So forget trying to be a good person and deal with all the problems. Walk in the spirit and the problems will go away. Seek first the kingdom of God. That's the key in walking in the Lord. And remember, our lives are not our own. We're bought with a price now. If Jesus died for us, for our salvation, why on earth would he let something take that away from us, take our joy away from us? We choose to let it take it away sometimes. So our lives are not our own. You belong to God, so trust him to look after you. There's a great story in should I tell my little Only Fools and Horses story? From Only Fools and Horses, when I like this, when Rodney had gone he'd just got married to, I'm assuming everyone knows Only Fools and Horses, but he had just got married to Cassandra. And I think it was his first day at work. He worked for Cassandra's dad, and but he cycled home from work. Instead of going home to his house with Cassandra, he cycles back to the flat with Delboy, his brother. And he comes in, he's got his cycle clips on, and he's coming in and he's asking what's for dinner, and he's all tired. And Delboy slowly says to him, he says, "I'm just gonna. Do you mind if I give you a bit of advice, Rodney? Something that will serve you well for your future life." And Rodney goes, "What's that?" And he says, "You don't live here anymore." And that's part of our problem, is we worry about our old life. And God's saying, "But you don't live there anymore. You're a new creation. Go and live in your new house that I've made for you." So it's a good lesson from Only Fools and Horses there. So happy ending. Job says he got double back of everything in his life. So he got twice as many camels, twice as many donkeys, twice as many cattle and sheep, twice as many sheep, and is even got a bigger family. And everything was happy ever after, and it was a happy end to the story at the end of it all. And there's lots and lots more detail and lots of more lessons you can get from that. But that's hopefully you got something out of that. The end.